Boriss Cilevičs, welcome to the Mediabox. Your report concerns ethnic profiling in Europe. Now, everyone knows that it shouldn't go on, but everyone also knows, of course, that it does. And it is a serious problem still, isn't it?
Yes, certainly. And this is exactly the reason why the Council of Europe comes back to this issue, because we adopted a corresponding resolution several years ago where we highlighted serious problems with this regard and adopted a number of recommendations. There is certain progress, no doubt, but still since then also some events happened which substantially aggravated the situation. In particular, the so-called refugee crisis, which also, of course, caused serious concerns and put some extra work on police and border controls, first of all. And in many cases, unfortunately, both the border guard and other law enforcement agencies just resorted to the easiest way, ethnic profiling. And this is another important issue, is appearance and growing of applications of artificial intelligence. Because we more and more rely on artificial intelligence, on computers, on programs, and it appears that there are many, let's say, underwater stones with this regard. Of course, generally, artificial intelligence helps a lot, in particular to police and also to courts and to other law enforcement bodies. But anyway, we can't rely on artificial intelligence to take into account human rights and other ethical issues. Because
I've been with Roma people in Romania. I've been in various other countries too, but in Romania there was a lot of prejudice against them and a suspicion that if there was a crime committed, it had to be somebody from the Roma community who was behind it. And part of the problem seems to be that ethnic minorities tend to come from poor areas, and the police always assume that criminals come from poor areas because rich people commit crimes that are just too big to see.
Yes, indeed, inequality has a tendency to be perpetuated. It's really very difficult to break through this glass ceiling, not only in terms of career, but also in terms of perception by other people. And we're witnessing this in America since the 60s. So desegregation, and actually the America was very progressive. And in fact, the very concept of equality as a positive right came from America through the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom was pioneering this legislation and practices in Europe, and now we have quite very well developed and ramified, for example, EU legislation with this regard, and also a lot of pieces of national legislation aiming at overcoming discrimination and ensuring equality. But we see that even in the United States, these problems which are related to perception and actually ethnic profiling has very much to do with perceptions. It's much more difficult to combat. It's not enough just to adopt good legislation. So the whole array of measures in different fields, including education, including confidence building, including empowering of civil society, and so on, must be involved in order to cope with this serious problem. So this is why one of my main conclusions in the course of elaborating this report is that we shouldn't deal with standard setting anymore. So we don't need new instruments. We have enough instruments both at the UN level, at the European level, and mostly at the national level too. Implementation is a problem. And in order to achieve this proper implementation of these standards and of these instruments, indeed, efforts are needed not only on the part of the government, but also civil society must be actively involved. And what is very important, that also police and other law enforcement bodies took active part in these efforts. So this is why I was very pleased when I received a letter of some professional international association of policemen, which expressed appreciation of my report and proposed draft resolution.
Given that we do still have problems, occasionally we have attacks by extremists and so on, they do have terrorism, it's very easy to fall back on ethnic profiling then, isn't it? It's very easy to say, well, if we only pick out the people who look like terrorists, we're in the clear. It's very hard to overcome that, isn't it?
Yes, but I believe that we should realize that it is not also unjust, not only contrary to human rights, but it also counterproductive in practical terms. It is absolutely counterproductive because it undermines public trust in the law enforcement. And these vulnerable groups with high level of poverty, with high level of alienation and exclusion from the society, if they do not trust police, it's much more difficult to work with them, and it actually encourages growing crime rather than helps to combat it. And one more important point, that ethnic profiling makes activities of law enforcement bodies predictable. So if the criminals and terrorists know that the police and border guards, first of all, will pay attention to the people looking in a certain manner, like having beard or having black skin and so on. So it's much more easier for masterminds of these terrorist acts to avoid this. So actually this, we are shooting our own leg when actually relying on ethnic profiling. And I believe it's very important to explain this to the public at large, because in the course of preparing this report, I met with many activists, with many NGOs from different countries, but I also had a lot of debates where just common people, they say, but of course we know that, for example, indeed, that Roma are inclined to crime. So of course Roma should be checked first. And it was not that easy always to explain why it is counterproductive and why it doesn't help to fight crime. And the terrorism can be of whatever kind. And many people, unfortunately, of different ethnic origin, of different religions, and looking quite differently are involved in terrorism. And if we set this narrow frame for ourselves, we make this task of fighting terrorism much more difficult.
Boriss Cilevičs, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Always pleasure to talk to you.